Hi, I'm Paul Brodie. We're back in the shop. We're still working on excelsiors. I'm not actually doing anything, but we're giving a slideshow. So Mitch is behind the camera. Thank you, Mitch. I'm going to talk more about the Excelsior motor. We're going to talk about how the cylinder heads got made, working on the barrels, and the camshaft. So if you're interested in motors, let's go for a little journey back in time. Most of this was happening back in about 2006, that kind of a time. So we'll get on with the slideshow. Thanks for hanging out in the shop. Last episode, we left off. I didn't have any heads, any cylinder heads. So we're going to talk about heads and how they got made. I'd never ever made cylinder heads in my life. When I worked in a machine shop when I was a kid after leaving high school, I did a lot of valve jobs and working on heads, changing valve guides, things like that. But to actually make a head out of nothing, never done that before. This is what I did. I've got the barrel here. I made up, I don't know what you call it, a fixture that came up. I knew the included valve angle of the two valves, inlet and exhaust. So I mounted a plate to hold the valve stem in the groove where the keeper goes. And you can see here I made up some valve seats, I've got spacers, got the spark plugs, the valves, and the valve guides. So this is looking on the side now, and you can see how I've got both of the valves in. What this is on the bottom, I got this laser cut, and it's made out of 1/8 inch mild steel, and it's the shape of the head gasket. So that's got a firmness that I can weld onto the post. This is how deep the cylinder head is. I already knew that. These are the exhaust ports. So I've got some valve springs there. So I'm figuring it out as I go. This is the inside of the combustion chamber now. Inlet valve is larger than the exhaust, and there's the spark plug thread. So you can see it on top now. I've got the spark plugs in. Not sure why. See the R? That's the rear head, that's the front head. So the front head is not the same as the rear head. The exhaust port comes out here on the rear head, and the exhaust port comes out here on the front head. And the inlet ports, they're kind of Y-shaped, and the cob sits out here. It's kind of mocked up here. This is the right side of the crankcase. You've got the bevel drive, and I'm just looking to see how things match up, because there's going to be a cam support here which allows the bevel drive to bolt on. That has to be a pretty secure connection there. Here's the mesh that I talked about earlier when I discussed the bevel drive. So I've filled it in with a bit of mesh. The mesh is going to hold the Bondo so I can work on the shape. These heads will never work, but I need to get the shape to know where the ports are and things like that. What the actual head looks like on the outside, I don't know at this point. I'm just working with what I have. So I've taken away the plates on either side. I've made a support that comes up. I've taken a piece of rod, I've bent it, and I've got these two half pieces of tube. You can see it here and here. And then while that support was still on there, I used some Bondo. You see the Bondo there? That's what holds this. And once the valves got held in place, then I can take off the two side supports. So it's a step at a time. Here's the exhaust port now. I've got the exhaust port on there. This is the bronze exhaust port nut. This is a neat project because never done anything like this before, and just one step at a time. Here's a cob that I got loaned. It didn't actually get used on the bike, but it was good for the size of the manifold here. You see there's a slight angle. I think it's 10 degrees. So this is the inlet port, and these nuts are what holds the manifold onto the intake stubs. I'll call them the stubs. Okay, I've got the manifold on the bike. It's in place, so intake manifolds are in. exhaust manifolds. So this is the rear head here. Obviously, that's the front cylinder. I've got a header pipe on there now, and I'm sure that the other header pipe's on there. What I need to do now is to work on the cam towers. So here we are. I've taken some, I think, 1/4 inch cold rolled flat bar. I've welded on some tubes. These are going to hold the bearings because the camshaft runs between, this is the right side, this is the left side. This is also the engine mount. Up here there's going to be a hole drilled. These get mounted on a face plate and centered up. I bore the hole, and now you can see it's up on the engine. Where these bolts go, I'm sure I got a spacer between this side and the other side. That's where the camshafts run, overhead cam, and I got both headers on now. I've got the bearing in there, and you can see I've got a mock-up camshaft. There's the end of the camshaft right there, and I'm boring it out to hold the bearing, I think. This is another one, and if you look, there's a red Sharpie, there's a shape there, and this shows you the shape of the left side. There's the hole, and a bolt goes through there and holds this onto the frame. So this is the top engine mount on top of the cam towers, and I'm starting to get a shape. I took some rod and I bent it. That's where the spark plug goes on each side. This is the right side cam tower. It's got a completely different shape. This shape here is what holds the bevel drive, and it's also got an arch on the bottom. This is another shot. I've got a valve spring sitting there, actually 2 valve springs, so it's coming along. See, there's Bondo here and Bondo there. I'm starting to work on what the shape looks like for the casting, because these will be cast out of aluminum. See this rod that goes across there? I figured out where that's going to go. That's going to be the rocker shaft. So I've tic-tacked on a little piece of steel here, because that's where the rocker shaft is going to go. It's going to connect the left side to the right side. It's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. You can see the camshafts there. That's just mock-up. I got very light valve springs on here. These are springs out of a carburetor, because when you want to turn over the motor, it's very easy. I had to start working on the rocker arms because I needed those for the mock-up motor. So you can see I've taken pieces of cold rolled flat bar. I've tic-tacked them together. Got 4 of them. They're basically all the same. And they dovetail with each other. That's how they fit together. Then this is later on. I did up an AutoCAD drawing. I went to Southern Cross Machine Shop, talked to Leon, and he machined these. He CNC'd these out of 4340, which is a beautifully hard steel, and did a really nice job on these rocker arms. Never had a problem with the rocker arms themselves. I've got a piece of aluminum. I think it's 4-inch, 4.5 inch. What I'm doing is making more fins for the mock-up cylinder head. You can see I'm started to make some grooves. Those actually ended up going in quite far. And there it is. I've drilled 4 holes. So those 4 holes go on top of that. I'm going to bore this out, and then I hacksaw it in the middle of the hole. So what happens is it adds to the fin. So I've put on a segment here. That's one segment. That's the second segment, and you can see there how those are fins there. I still need to do the 3rd segment and the 4th segment, and that's the fin after it's put on. So you can see how the head is starting to take shape. I've welded on some tubes here. That's where the rocker shafts go into. And I still have the light valve springs on that. Those are just off a carburetor. I still have to shape the inside of the combustion chamber. You can see the mesh there, and that's kind of the top view. I got head gaskets made. This is made out of a sheet of copper. I found a local guy who I think did water jet cutting. I don't think you can laser cut copper sheet because it conducts the heat too fast. And I think the thickness was 0.042 or 045, something like that. So I got a bunch of head gaskets made. They turned out quite nicely. This is the finish of the mock-up head. So you can see I've got the outside shape. I put Bondo down there. These are the fins I added. And you can see the Bondo inside the port. So this is about the time when I got contacted by Kevin Holland. He's a pattern maker. He lives down in MO. I think MO is Missouri. And he'd been watching what I was doing on my website. And he wanted to be a part of the Excelsior project. So he very graciously and kindly offered to help out with the pattern making on the cylinder heads and the cylinders, because I didn't have anybody lined up for that. So I paid for materials and he did all the CNC work. I sent him down the heads. That was a bit nerve-wracking because I only had these two mock-up heads. I didn't have any backups, and he made up a drawing off those heads. And this is his AutoCAD version. His version was more up to date than mine. There's another side view of it. This is the spark plug hole here. And then he started working on the patterns. This is the cylinder head. It's upside down. That's part of what gets cut off. You need that much mass so that when it shrinks, it pulls the molten aluminum down from this. There's a name for that. I'm not quite sure of it anymore. This is working on the pattern for the cylinder. There's the cylinder from here to here. That's the excess again. And this is a part of the cylinder head. I'm not quite sure how this works, but this piece fits into here and locks somehow. So he did an amazing amount of work. So I'm very grateful for how he helped out. This is making the pattern for the cylinder head. You can see what size of, I think this is some kind of a special plastic. You can see the size of the block. So I spent quite a bit of money on materials. And then finally, I got my cylinder heads. So that was a big cause for celebration because for some reason I waited months for this whole process to happen. So there's a batch of unmachined cylinder heads. This is the barrels, and this is a fixture I made up. It holds the barrel, and on the top is some drill jigs, and that's how I put the 4 holes into the top of the cylinder. This is a batch of 6. I've got the studs in. You can see how the bores come down a little bit, so they need to be final bored, and then they get sent out for Nickel liner. I want it to be high tech. This is working on the cylinder heads. Every time you have a casting and you want to do something, you usually have to make up a fixture. So there's a fixture here, and there's a thread here, and there's an Allen screw that bolts right through to hold the head because you can't hold the head any other way. I've got my radius tool in the lathe. That's a 3/16 radius, and it faces it, and it also does the inside of the bore of the combustion chamber to match up with the size of the head gasket. So that's what's going on there. There's some heads that have been faced, and I've cleaned up the combustion chamber. They have no valve guides yet, no seats, and they need to be machined on the inlet and the exhaust. This is a front head, and that's the exhaust port. So because there's a front head and the rear head, I need 4 fixtures to work on the ports. This is a counterweight because the head has to spin in the lathe. And so if I don't have the counterweight, it's out of balance. You can see the tool bit there. I'm facing the exhaust port right there. And when you switch on the lathe, this is action shot. I'm actually machining it down to put a thread on there. That head is spinning around at a few hundred RPM. Working on the camshaft. So these are the bearings which go into the cam support. There are circlips to hold the bearings in. This is some a blank. I call it a cam blank. So the lobes get made on these here, and one of the exhausts of the cams goes clockwise and the other one goes anti-clockwise. I can't remember which one's which now. So I had to figure out the cam timing. So what I did, I made a camshaft which comes apart. This is an Allen screw right here, and this is the shaft. This is where the bearings go, here and here. And see there's a lobe there. And so the lobe goes into the Allen screw and I can bolt it together. On the cam profile, what I used was an early Sportster, because the early Sportsters were pretty lumpy. We're talking like early 60s, I believe, that they were pretty lumpy cams, and they were a roller cam as well. A roller cam has a different profile than a regular cam. So I put it together and I've assembled it, and I've got a dial indicator, and I'm not sure what's going on here. This looks like a sprocket off a bicycle, but there's got to be a degree wheel somewhere, maybe down on the case. I can't remember what was going on there at that time. And so I figured out where I needed those lobes to be. And to make really incremental adjustments, I made up a fixture here. So this piece of aluminum holds one lobe and this holds the other lobe. So what I could do is to loosen off the Allen screw, and this fixture part got held with a C-clamp, and then I could move this other lobe incrementally while this lobe stayed in place. That's how I figured out the cam timing. I didn't read it in a book or anywhere. I just figured it out. This is a bunch of the blanks, and they got machined up. I forget what metal it is, but it's a nice, very hard metal. Well, not that hard because it had to get machined. And then after this, I tried cutting away the excess of the lobe so it could be ground. I couldn't do it on my mill. It just wanted to chatter and move. So I sent it back to Leon, and Leon did that CNC. And then I think the cams got hardened, and then they got it sent out for grinding. I think we left on 8 or 10 thou for where the bearings go. And then after that, it got sent out and the lobes were ground. So it's quite a process making your own cams out of nothing. This is what it looks like with the rocker arms. The rocker arms are basically all set to be installed. These are the rocker shafts. On the adjusters, I used Honda. I think it was a 6mm fine thread. So those are just stock Honda. On the rollers, I used a regular bearing, and that didn't last. They just blew up after a while. They didn't last very long at all. So I found a guy down in LA. He makes rollers for the NHRA dragsters. So he made me up a set of custom rollers and shafts, and he even ground the needle bearings which go inside those rollers. So I got that all figured out. So basically, got the motor assembled. This is for motor number 1. And on a fine day in June of 2007, we fired up Excelsior number 1, and it was loud. It vibrated. I hadn't learned how to balance the flywheels yet, and it burnt a beautiful hole in my lawn from the rear pipe. That was quite a day. That was back in 2007. And that's the shot of the right side of Excelsior number 1. We hope you've enjoyed this slideshow talking about Excelsior motors and all the little engine details. Mitch and I like coffee. If you buy us some coffees, we appreciate that very much. Helps to fuel our channel. And if you liked it, please give us a thumbs up, subscribe. We'll see you next time, and we'll do something else in the shop here. Thanks for watching. Take care.